Take some time to go look this up.
Wow, you're playing a very safe, narrow box tonight. Yeah. You want to talk about it? You worried about getting canceled or something?
Yeah, I'm worried about you getting canceled.
Well, I'm getting fucking slaughtered on social media most days of the week. But let's get back to the pictures. Okay, so the first image that I have is U.S. real gross domestic product. This actually came from the CNBC article. And it shows there's 2 quarters of successive negative GDP growth going back from Q1 of 2022 to Q2 of 2022. And we said in July, when this data was reported, around the same time that the White House, kind of end of June, early July of 2022, the White House came out and said, hey, 2 successive quarters of negative GDP growth is not technically the definition of a recession. Mm-hmm. And they tried to thwart the National Bureau of Economic Research being concerned. What was funny about that is the National Bureau of Economic Research typically doesn't even react until 12 to 18 months after a dip in 2 successful quarters like this. They usually wait and look at all the data, and they declare a recession retroactively.
So now let's ask the follow-up question. Why would the White House want to do this?
Because they didn't want the rhetoric of us being in a bad economy. Mm-hmm. Keep in mind, the White House and, frankly, the government, far beyond the White House, the House, the Senate, they'd all approved these unprecedented stimulus packages that went out to everybody. And the Fed had acted late. And let's be honest, there's a huge amount of political unrest. There's extremism. There's, the extreme Republicans and extreme Democrats. You could say the left or the right, whatever you want to say these days. It doesn't matter. And people are trying to really fight to stay in power.
Right. I would just ask everyone to think of it this way, too. If the Federal Reserve is out here trying to perform quantitative tightening, meaning they're trying to pull money out of the system because that ultimately will help reduce inflation, right? That's their goal. If they've been attempting to do that for the last year and a half, close to 2 years, how in the world can we have such a positive GDP print, right? That should be alarming and concerning for everyone when the very nature of the thing that they're trying to control, they have not been able to control.
The latest internet troll that attacked me was suggesting that we have devalued the currency, and as a result of that, things will just gradually cost more and more over time. And I would say that's probably a very narrow view of a much bigger problem.
Yes.
I don't think we've devalued the currency as much as real wages have not kept up with real inflation. Mm-hmm. And you can argue that's devaluation of the currency, and I think there's some truth to that. But when you start to go back through recessionary economies where things like the value of a dollar have gone up and down, the problem is when you look at something as a comparison, and we typically use it as a proxy, home values have far outpaced wage growth.
Yes.
Right? So GDP, gross domestic product, to gross domestic income is an interesting ratio, but they're actually moving separate ways now.
Yeah.
GDI, gross domestic income, is actually going down while gross domestic product is going up.
And that's really what I believe. Was it the National Bureau of Economic Research or was it the White House that's what they tried to cite as when they averaged out the 2,
yes,
then it was actually a positive figure. But I had never seen them really do this before.
That was the White House's spin on one metric. Mm-hmm. Now, I will say the last 10 recessions were declared after 2 successive quarters of negative GDP growth. And the whole GDI versus GDP debate, which the White House has now tried to put in play, has never really been relevant or at the forefront of anybody's ideas. Mm-hmm. Whether the National Bureau of Economic Research really relies on that or not, we will soon see, I would imagine. Right. But the reason why I brought this chart up is it shows you Q1, Q2, negative GDP growth. And then after that, you've seen GDP kind of flat and then trailing down up until this quarter's print, which was at 4.9%. Clearly almost double what the previous prints had been. But when you look at it over the scope of the history of the United States, going back several years, in this case to about, call it 2005, 2004.
Actually, I have a chart if Odin wants to pull it up so you can actually reference it. It's down a little bit further on. Right there, the first one. Goes back 10 years.
Yeah, effectively the same chart. But what's interesting about this is when you look at the U.S. gross domestic product, you'll see that after 2 successive quarters of negative GDP growth, it is not uncommon to see these blips up like this, even in a recessionary economy.
Right.
So for people to go, oh, okay, hey, this is indicative of the fact that we're not in a recession currently right now, I would say no. Mm-hmm. So for those of you who follow the show for any prolonged period of time, you know that Saied and I have long thought that in January, as of January 1st, 2022 till now, we've felt that we've been in a recessionary economy.
Yes.
And that a prolonged recessionary economy, greater than a normal moving economy, should be anticipated. not only in length of time that the recession will last, but I think in the scale that it'll take to scale up. So, for example, when you remove all the elasticity out of the economy, which is what we did with all this artificial interest rate deflation and all of the stimulus, you've taken all of the elasticity out of the economy. It doesn't move as quickly as it once did by doing things like raising the Fed funds rate. Mm-hmm. So it's going to take time to build momentum back in the economy, which is why I think the treasuries took so long to respond and start to rise. And they've been hovering around 4.9% for the last couple of months.